Today is October 23rd, or 27th, 2023, and this is the 42nd episode of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and today I'll be joined by Mike Koomar. This is the Big 12 preview episode, continuing on with our conference-by-conference updates. So, Mike, we've got a little bit of a new look to the Big 12 this year, and we've got three teams joining, and that's BYU, UCF, and four teams. Sorry, BYU, UCF, Houston, and what is Cincinnati?
Cincinnati.
Okay,
there you go.
So this is not the super gauntlet that it used to be. Last year we had almost every team with at least a chance to go to the NCAA tournament with a couple weeks left, but that's not going to be the case again this year, and that might be better for the teams that are near the top.
Absolute gauntlet the Big 12 has been the last several years, really. This really started in 2015. But it's a little bit different look for the conference this year with the additions. Usually the conference format's been 18 games. You play each team twice, and each team is a tournament team. That's not the case this year with a 14-team conference. Additions like Brigham Young and UCF are going to be, for a couple teams, some automatic wins. And games where when you're traveling on the road, especially to Central Florida, I don't see that being an incredibly tough game. And I don't want to dog on Central Florida too much in this podcast, but they're just not a basketball team, and they're a school that isn't looking good right now with all their departures from last year. But with that being said, Houston, a huge addition for the Big 12. That's a really, really good team and a marquee program that's going to compete for a conference championship right off the bat. Despite losing guys like Marcus Sasser, that's a really, really exciting team this year, especially with a couple of great additions.
Yeah, so the other three might struggle, but there's no reason that Houston shouldn't be as good as they've been the last couple years. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, Mike, and that means up first is your Baylor Bears. Scott Drew is back for year number 21. They're 23-11 a year ago and 11-7 in the Big 12. They tied for third. A lot of changes to the personnel. Adam Flagler, Keontae George, L.J. Cryer, and Flo Thamba are gone. They do bring in Jaden Nunn, Ray J. Dennis, and then a couple freshmen, led by Jacoby Walter. Now, you've got a couple other returners too. Jalen Bridges, Jonathan Chama-Chachua back, Langston Love. Talk me through what the expectations for Baylor should be this year.
Yeah, so it's a very different look for Baylor, losing their entire backcourt from a year ago. It was one of the top backcourts in college basketball until some late season injuries, both to Flagler and Keontae George, really inhibited their performance coming down the stretch. Baylor was a team that really folded last year going into March. Really, really poor at the end of the regular season, flopped in the conference championship, and then as well in the Big Dance. But this is a new look team. I think the biggest shock from the offseason was losing L.J. Cryer. Nobody in Waco Town expected to lose L.J. this season, much less transfer to a now conference rival in Houston. He's transferring back home. We're going to get to that a little bit later. But this is still a really good backcourt for for Baylor, excuse me. Jaden Nunn is going to be a great transfer from VCU. He averaged about 10 points a game last year. And then their starting point guard is likely going to be Raji Davis, MAC Player of the Year last year for Toledo. So he's going to be a fantastic addition for Baylor. They also got Miro Light, new addition from Finland. I think he's ranked 40th by ESPN in the top 100 players. And then the big one, Jacoby Walker. That's going to be a really key player for Baylor. He's going to likely start first game as a freshman, and we'll see what he's got against Auburn in their first game of the year. So I think there's cautious excitement in Waco for these Bears. Open up a new stadium in January, so let's see how the season goes for them.
Yeah, so we've been looking at the analytics here before we will give our predictions in the previous ones. Baylor 7th in KenPom, 5th best offense, 20th best defense. Now these are projections, but Bart Torvik is a lot harsher on them, 24th, 9th in offense, and 54th in defense. So,
in defense last year was the kryptonite for Baylor. Usually not the case for a Scott Drew team. In the last 4 years, Baylor was in the top 20, including their championship season when they were a top 5 defensive team. Last year, ranked 107th in the NCAA in defense. So that really, really killed them coming down the stretch, especially when they got cold shooting. It seemed like Baylor lived and died by the three-pointer. They're not going to be able to do that this year. They've got some good shooters, but nothing like the Adam Flagler, LJ Cryer lethal combo they had last year.
Yeah, you don't have to be elite at defense. You just can't be that bad. You can be in the 30s. You can be with their offense. You can be in the 20s and the 30s and still be a top 10 team in the country. But once you get in that 50s and up range, you're going to lose some games that you probably shouldn't. So I've got them fourth. Mike, where do you think Baylor finished this year?
I actually think fourth is right on the number, Sean. You got some teams ahead of them that I really like. And I want to be clear, when I'm talking about the Big 12 this year, I think the top 6 teams in the conference, my top 6 teams are all top 15 teams in the nation. Right now, the AP rankings don't agree with that. But I think you're going to see as the year progresses, this is still the top conference in college basketball, and these top 6 teams are phenomenal. I think Baylor, if they truly finish fourth in this conference, they're looking at a 2 or a 3 seed. So, outstanding team.
Yeah, I think the introduction of a couple more teams that, 3 of them should be wins for the top 4 teams, and that is only going to help the Big 12 come tournament time because, with 10 teams, even 7 it's a lot. That's multiple under 500 teams making the conference. I don't think we'll see that this year, but everybody will be a couple wins better than they were last year. So, next team in alphabetical order, Mike, is one of the new teams, the BYU Cougars. Mark Pope is in his 5th season in charge in Utah. Last year they were 19-15 and 7-9, which was tied for 5th in the West Coast Conference. They do have Fousseyni Traore, their best player. He averaged 13 and 8 last year, but Mark Pope is a decent coach. I don't think we can say that he isn't, but it could be tough for the Cougars in year one in the Big 12.
Yeah, Mark Pope's team, 2 years ago we saw a really fantastic showing in the WCC. They knocked off Gonzaga. They looked really good, but last year they really flopped. I think they finished 7-9 in the conference. And this season, they didn't really have any crazy additions to their team. Nothing popped off coming off of the transfer portal. Marcus Adams Jr. was their only top 100 freshman that they got coming in. But no notable players coming out of the transfer portal, which we'll see from the rest of the conference as we go through this podcast. That's how a lot of these guys beefed up their rosters. And we're going to talk about the NIT later. A lot of these players we saw play in the NIT last year or coached in the NIT last year transferred to the big stage at the Big 12. So Brigham Young not really adding anybody in the transfer portal. I don't really see them doing that much. I have them going 13th, Sean, out of the 14 teams in the Big 12.
Yeah, I have them 14th, Mike. And the thing that I will say with the other team that will probably occupy the last 2 spots for us is that it's quite out of the way for some of these Big 12 teams that have stayed pretty, Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma range. Utah is far away, and so is Florida. So I think you might get, 1 or 2 odd home wins for these teams just off of, out of nowhere. But Mark Pope's, his quote was a little bit scary. He said, "We've played great teams every year, St. Mary's and Gonzaga in the WCC. Now we get to play them every night." So they didn't do so well against those teams.
He's not wrong. 2 years ago, the WCC was a very good conference. With San Francisco having a good year, BYU had a good year as well. But, he's absolutely right. There is no off nights for Brigham Young this year. They don't get to play Pepperdine. They don't get to play Santa Clara. And those are, I guess I would say, even top half teams in the WCC. So it's going to be an adjustment. I think it'll be easier next year when you have teams from their region coming into the conference, guys like Utah, Arizona State, Colorado. But for them, another thing they're not going to be used to is traveling long distances for every single game that they play in conference on the road. It's going to be a challenge for them in year one.
So the next team is another newcomer. It's the Cincinnati Bearcats. Wes Miller taking the helm for the third season in Ohio. They were one of the teams that made the NIT last year, 23-13 and 11-7 in the American. They do lose Landers Nolly and David DeJulius, their two best players, but they do bring in a number of transfers that are pretty familiar. Most notably, Simas Lukosius from Butler and C.J. Frederick from Kentucky, and then a couple of other highly ranked freshmen. Victor Locken, their big guy, is pretty good, but you have a couple solid players. I do think that they will be pretty considerably clear of the UCFs and the BYUs, but to get really even into the middle of the conference would be a tremendous success in year one in the Big 12.
Yeah, I think the big player to watch right now for Cincinnati is going to be Aziz Bandego, who we do not know if he's going to be able to play this year. He's playing on his third team. He transferred from Utah Valley, a team that made the finals in the NIT last year in a pretty historic run. If he wins his appeal, this team could be really good because he is going to be a 7-footer. I think other than Hunter Dickinson, he might become the second best big man in the Big 12 this year. So we'll see if he can get healthy and get eligible. That's going to be the game changer for Cincinnati. Otherwise, they did bring in some good transfers in Victor Locken, as you said, and Simas Lukosius, but we'll see. Cincinnati is known for being a more basketball school. They're going to have a lot of people going to games, and they're going to be excited about being in a new conference. Right now, I have Cincinnati as 11th. I still don't think too highly of them, but I still, like you said, Sean, I got them a little bit ahead of BYU.
Yeah, I've got them a couple spots above in ninth.
Yes.
None of these players have ever really been seen in the Big 12 before, and I think that might just cause, they know what every other of these teams are. So I think that might cause a couple of issues early, but I would say a tournament appearance would be a little bit shocking for me. I think I could see them kind of being a little better than they were last year, but, that's still quite a few games under 500 in the conference.
And I think, Sean, that's an excellent point that you bring up with the physicality of the conference. You've got so many transfers in the Big 12 this year, so many top-performing transfers. I mean, we can go down the list. Hunter Dickinson, LJ Cryer is obviously transferring in the conference, but Max Adams, another guy that we're going to be talking about later. The list goes on. How will they adjust to the physicality of the conference? And I think some of these players that are transferring from other conferences like the Big Ten are going to have an easier time. But if you're transferring from mid-major conferences, it's going to be a little bit of a shock.
So the next team here, Mike, is another newcomer, and it's the one that we think will be near the top. The Houston Cougars, Kelvin Sampson, taking charge for the 10th season. They were 33-4 and 17-1 in the American last year, and they made the Sweet 16. They do lose 3 double-digit scorers from a year ago, Jarris Walker, Marcus Sasser, and Tremont Mark. But they do bring in Damian Dunn from Temple and L.J. Cryer from Baylor, along with a couple of highly ranked freshmen. Jamal Shedd, Juwan Roberts, Terrence Arsenault, Emmanuel Sharp. A lot of their role players who played, the 10, 15, 20 minutes a game are back also. You think it's crazy for Houston to compete for the title in year one?
Not at all. And the reason I say that is because of their backcourt. It's phenomenal, Sean. And I'm going to go over this more and more. I think the Big 12 has some unbelievable backcourts in college basketball. This is one of them. Jamal Shedd, he kind of played second fiddle last year to Marcus Sasser, but this is his team to take the reins on. He's been experienced. He's been to the Final Four. He's going to be the guy leading his team this year, and he's got some outstanding guys to do it with. L.J. Cryer, the leading scorer for the Baylor Bears last year, leading three-point shooter. L.J. Cryer is not necessarily a guy that's going to make his own, make a move to the bucket, but he's going to get a lot of good looks, and he's going to convert on. I remember seeing some games last year when this guy gets hot, he is hot. I'm talking games where 9 for 10 from three-point range. And he's going to be joined by Damian Dunn, who scored 15 points a game last year in Temple. American Conference, not as good, right? But they were still playing against teams like Memphis and Houston last year. Still a moderately competitive conference. My concern for Houston is the lack of depth in the front court. If guys get injured, if guys get in foul trouble, that's where they could lose games. And especially against teams like Kansas, where you got Hunter Dickinson that you're matching up against, I think that's a matchup nightmare for Houston. With that being said, I've got Houston number 3 right now in my preseason rank. I think Kansas and we'll get to my number 2 team later are ahead of them. But still, they're going to compete for a conference title in year 1. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've got them third also. I think there's a pretty, I think 1 and 2 is pretty set, and then Houston should be right behind them, and then Baylor should be right behind them. Obviously, that could be interchanged, but that's kind of where everybody's seeing them right now. I do like their start of the year, Houston. They have a lot of games that they should win by a lot. They do play a couple of power conference opponents, Texas A&M on a neutral, Xavier on the road. You should win both those games, and a lot of these games against 200 opponents and even high 100s opponents, great opportunity to build your bench, and they've got to use that because you cannot go through the Big 12 with 7 or 8 players.
Absolutely.
And
I would like to say, Sean, Houston, it just feels like they belong in the Big 12. I think the other teams, adding them to the Big 12 kind of seemed a little bit weird, but Houston is a perfect match, especially on the basketball court. You got a really good offense, elite backcourt, a physical team with Kelvin Sampson. This just feels right, and they're going to settle into some natural rivalries. Houston and Baylor this year is going to be a really exciting game, partially because LJ Crowder will be returning to Waco. You're also going to see Texas and Houston being a phenomenal matchup there. The experience of Texas is going to be fun to watch against this high-flying Houston team. So they're just coming into all these natural rivalries, and man, it just feels right for them to be in the conference.
Yeah, they're certainly right in that hub of the Big 12 that I was talking about earlier. You're branching out for some of the other ones, and those were football moves more than anything else. But Houston was not a football move. They've had one good year in my lifetime. So they are third. They have opened at third in KenPom with the third most efficient offense and 5th most efficient defense. So there's not a weakness on either side of the ball, really. There's a way that Houston could be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, like they have been over the years.
Yeah.
So next team, Mike, we're going to go up north to Keyshawn Gilbert, Curtis Jones, a couple freshmen, couple other returners and players that played not super meaningful minutes, but this is a little bit of a mixed bag for me. There's a lot of changing parts for the Cyclones. What do you think will happen for them this year?
I actually have really high expectations for Iowa State. I got them ranked 6th right now in my Big 12 preseason, but with that being said, I think my top 6 teams in the Big 12, they're all 4 seeds or better in the NCAA tournament right now. You've got arguably the best recruit in Iowa State history, Omaha Billu, coming in. He's going to lead the team right away as a 5-star recruit. And the first big landing that TJ Osselberger's had here at his 3rd year now at Iowa State. You also got some great transfers. Curtis Jones, 15 points a game at Colorado last year. Justin Pavitsky at Wofford also averaged 15 points a game. This is going to be a really good competitive team, Sean. If there's one thing that I've learned from TJ Osselberger, he has overperformed every single year he's been at Iowa State. I think he'll continue to do that. And you also look at some of the other guys that they brought in the transfer portal. I mean, Iowa State killed it in the transfer portal this year. They got one of his old players, Keyshawn Gilbert, who played for Coach Osselberger at UNLV before he came over to Iowa State. So, I mean, this is going to be a phenomenal team this year, and I love them to be able to make a run in the Big 12. I'd say they're my number 2 dark horse. My number 1 dark horse we'll talk about later.
I've got them 7th, Mike, just 1 point behind, or 1 spot behind them. It's not going to be anything different for the Cyclones this year in terms of how they play, although they do have a completely different team. They open up at 31st in KenPom, 79th on offense, and 3rd on defense. So a crazy different sort of how it's not going to be equal on different sides of the ball. And they're going to be elite defensively, and if they can score, you're going to have to watch out. They do have some players who scored before, like you've said, but not it's not expected for them to be 79th is a little bit low. They're going to have to do a little better than that to be a top 4 seed. But I think they should make the tournament. 7th is no. I don't mean any disrespect by that. I just think they're 6 better teams.
Yeah. Ken Palm's pretty interesting this year. They have BYU right now preseason at 36 and Iowa State at 31. I think those programs are in completely different spots on the spectrum. I think BYU doesn't play postseason basketball. I think Iowa State's a 4 seed in the tournament. So pretty interesting to look at Ken Palm so far. I'll be curious to see how that shifts as the rest of the season goes.
Yeah, it usually takes 10, 12 games for those to really mean a lot. Yeah. But, we're mentioning it because, something to note.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Next team is the Kansas Jayhawks, 28-8 in the Big 12 last year, 13-5. They did lose in the round of 32. Bill Self is back for season number 21. They do lose Jalen Wilson, Grady Dick, Yosef Yesufu, and Ernest Uday. They do bring in one of the better transfer hauls, Hunter Dickinson, Nick Timberlake, and Parker Braun, along with 3 highly ranked freshmen. Mike, yeah. Kansas is opened as number 1 in the AP Top 25. They've got national championship aspirations down there in Lawrence.
Sean, this is the number 1 team in college basketball right now. And I know last year UNC was the top team in the country preseason, and they really flopped. That is not the case with this Kansas team. This team is locked and loaded. And I personally, UConn made a really good run, and I don't know if anybody was going to be able to catch UConn. But if Bill Self was on the sidelines for this Kansas Jayhawks team last year, they're a Final Four team. I don't think there's any question about it. They lost in the round of 32 in a fluky game to Arkansas. It happens. They had their assistant coach coaching. He's not Bill Self. This team was phenomenal, and I think they're hungry for redemption this year because they bring back so many key players from last year. DeJuan Harris, who's, in my opinion, is the first team All Big 12. He's coming back to lead the team at the point guard position. Kevin McCullers, a really strong power forward, reminds me a little bit of Mark Vital back in the day at Baylor. KJ Adams, another really solid player for Kansas. He's going to make a huge impact this year on the return. Oh, and by the way, they bring back, preseason All-American Hunter Dickinson. A huge transfer for the Jayhawks. A big loss for the boys in Ann Arbor, but you add some pretty good depth to them with some premier freshmen. Elmarco Jackson, the 20th player in the country, and then this is a funny name a little bit, Johnny Fumpy from Australia. He's 35th best player. He's going to come off the bench for sure. My only concern for Kansas is going to be their depth. Reminds me a little bit of Baylor a couple of years ago when you saw them get the 1 seed, get knocked out in the round of 32. That was a team that had a really good backcourt, and they had a good front court, but injuries piled up, and I do not think this Kansas team is that deep. They're about 7 or 8 players deep. With that being said, I still think they're the best team in the country. That's just their only pitfall that they may have.
Yeah, I think finding a way for KJ Adams to play the 4 is the biggest. KJ Adams is not a three-point shooter. He's not really a back-to-basket post scorer either. But, Hunter's going to be the 5. Hunter can shoot it a little bit, but Harris has been spotty at times from 3. So maybe sometimes they do go cold, but Nick Timberlake was, 40%. So you need somebody to hit a 3. There's not many people that can play that role better than that. They are number 2 in Ken Palm, 9th best offense and best defense. I think scoring on them is going to be an issue because they've got some shot blockers. They've got some ball defenders in DeJuan Harris. It's going to be hard to score on them. I've got them 2nd. I have them just losing out to the team that I think is going to win, but they could easily win. They could easily win this conference and the national championship.
No kidding. 2 for Kansas. Wow.
I'm assuming you got them number 1?
They're number 1 for me, yeah. I think they're the clear-cut number 1 favorite. Not to say that there aren't other teams that can top them, but right now they're the best team in college basketball. They're the best team in the Big 12.
Yeah, they deserving of the number 1 ranking, but I wanted to mix it up a little bit. So we'll go to their in-state rivals, the Kansas State Wildcats, 26-10 and 11-7 last year in Jerome Tang's first year. They exceeded all expectations in Manhattan by
Yeah.
making the Elite Eight. They do lose their two big players from last year, though. Keontae
Yeah.
Johnson and Marquise Noel, and then Desi Sills and Ismail Massoud are also out. But they do pick up one of the better transfers in the country in Arthur Kaluma from Creighton. They do get Tyler Perry from North Texas and Quest Glover from Samford and a couple of freshmen also. Last year, certainly exceeded a lot of expectations. What can Kansas State do to make sure that they don't take too big of a step back?
Yeah, the Tang Gang were my dark horse favorites in the Big 12 last year, and everybody had them ranked 9th out of 10 preseason. I like them this year. I don't think they're one of the top 4 teams in the conference for sure. But this is going to be a really, really fast paced offense. I think they're going to struggle against teams like Kansas because of the size and Kansas' ability to get back on defense quickly. That's one of the staples of Bill Self. With that being said, this is going to be a quick team. Super athletic wings to support. Cam Carter is going to be the returning point guard. Tyler Perry, as you said, transferred from North Texas, was NIT player of the tournament. You also had Arthur Kaluma, as you said, coming from Creighton. Huge losses with Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel. I think they accounted for like 75% of the points last year for Kansas State. But if there's one thing I know, Sean, is you do not count out Coach Tang. He's rebuilt Kansas State before. He did it in his first year when he lost all but 2 scholarship players. He got it again in the transfer portal. This guy's automatic in the transfer portal, Sean. He really still is. And I'm excited to see what Kansas State's going to do this year. I have Kansas State a little bit higher. I have them at 7th right now. I think they're still going to be a really good team. I'd say about a 6 seed projected in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I've got them 5th. I think that they're definitely a class below Baylor in the top 4, but they've got a similar makeup to last year. They've got a really good guard in Tyler Perry, who's very small and quick. And then Kaluma at 6'7", maybe a little bit smaller than Keontae Johnson, but I mean he could play the small ball 4. And you got Tomlin coming back, and they're not going to be super reliant on 2 players, but you're getting 2 really good players back to fill pretty similar roles to the 2 that have gone. So I don't think there'll be any drop off really. Maybe not an Elite 8 run, but in terms of wins and losses and metrics and regular season wins and stuff, I don't see them making too much of a drop off. And even if they do end up finishing in the 7 to 8 range in the Big 12, that still should be enough for them to get a not even just in the tournament, but a pretty good seed too. So, next team is the Oklahoma Sooners. Porter Moser is back for year 3 in Norman. Last year, they were 15-17 and 5-13. A little bit of a disappointment. They do lose Grant Sherfield, Tanner Groves, Jacob Groves, and Jalen Hill. They do bring in a number of transfers. Javion McCullum from Siena, who was one of the best players in the MAC. Rivaldo Suarez from Oregon. John Hughley IV from Pitt. Letre Dethard from Utah Valley. Max Klanschek from Houston Christian. Jelon Moore from Georgia Tech. And then freshman Jacob Cole and Caden Cooper. So last year did not go to plan for Oklahoma. Do you have any faith that they can get back into the NCAA tournament this year?
This could be, and I say could be like Kansas State from a year ago. This is a completely new team, completely new to the conference. He lost the Groves brothers, which were his primary weapon last year, especially when they knocked out Alabama in that signature win last year. With that being said, brand new team. You got good talent coming in. Like you said, Javion McCollum averaged about 16 points a game for Siena last year. That's going to be one of their stars. But I think that lack of understanding of the physicality of the Big 12 is going to catch up to them in the conference season. And so for that reason, I do not have OU finishing up that high in the Big 12. I got them right now at 12. With that being said, I think this is a team that could finish 5th or 6th. You never know until you can see this group play together. But I think physicality is going to be a big issue for them.
Yeah, McCollum has done it against power conference opponents before. He cooked Florida State last year in the ESPN Events Invitational, and he is really he is one of the he's listed at 6'2", but seems way smaller and faster than that. I've seen him a couple times, and if there's any sort of guard that can make the jump from mid major to high major, I think he'll be really good. He might be able to hang with some of these really good guards, at least for part of the game, or enough not to lose the game in that. So Oklahoma is not as highly ranked as some of these other teams. They're 67th in Bart Torvik. I've got them 11th, Mike, so pretty similar to you. I just think that it's going to take them some time to figure it out. They don't have a terrible non-conference schedule, but they do play Iowa, Arkansas, and North Carolina all on a neutral. And, two of those teams are top 25 teams, and Iowa's a team that should be in the NCAA tournament too. So if you lose all three of those, I can't really see them getting better than maybe 500 in the conference. And, it doesn't seem like there's a great blueprint to make the big dance, but nobody can draw them up like Porter Moser, so I'm not ruling them out.
That is true. Yeah, can't rule them out.
So next team we're going to go to is the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Last year they were 20-16 and 8-10 in the Big 12. They made it to the quarterfinals of the NIT. This is Mike Boynton's 7th season in charge, and it's going to come with a very different roster. Avery Anderson, Caleb Boone, Caleb Asbury, Musa Cisse have all left the program. Javon Small, Mike Marsh, Jarius Hicklin, Isaiah Miranda, Eric Daly, Brandon Garrison, and Justin McBride are all coming in. There's not a whole lot of scoring there from last year, but there's a lot of these guys who have done, 10, 12, 13 points a game at some other programs. So, they'll play really tough. Boynton's teams always defend, but I think offensively they might be a little limited, and if they do have a poor season, it's going to be because they can't score.
Yeah, Boynton's teams are always a tough out, especially when they're playing in Stillwater. Boyd's got a good backcourt. He's got a really good backcourt. He's going to have a completely untested front court, though, with losses to Khalid Boone and Musisi. But Javon Small, 15 points a game last year for Eastern Carolina. He was kind of the second fiddle with ECU and still scored 15 points a game. And then they've got that former 5-star transfer from Kansas, Bryce Thompson. He's going to have the potential to prove himself as the 5-star, the guy that had so much hype coming out of high school that really flopped to KU. So he's going to be a guy that I really am excited to see. John Michael Wright's going to be the big returner for Oklahoma State. We'll see if he can get the Cowboys offense rolling. But with that being said, if Bryce Thompson and Javon Small can get the offense going at Oklahoma State, this is going to be a dangerous team. Sean, I got him preseason 9th right now, probably a little bit ahead of you because I believe in Boynton's team this year. I'm curious to see what you're thinking.
Yeah, I've got him 10th. I think they will be better than Oklahoma. I think them and Cincinnati, I could flip them, and I think we've got the.
I think so.
We've got the bottom 2 or 3 teams. That's a tier. We've got this lower middle tier of Cincy and both the Oklahoma teams, and then there might be a couple of, there might be 6 really tiers of teams that we can classify in this Big 12. But I think they're a little better than Oklahoma. They've got a similar makeup to Iowa State in the fact that they are really good at defense and aren't as good at offense, and they're just not really as good at either. So they're going to play like Iowa State. They're just not going to be as good. Bart Torvik's got them 129th in offense and 19th in defense. That's a lot of, 129. You got to score it a little better than that. Ken Pom is 97 on offense and 51 on defense, so a little better offense there, a little worse defense. I think you got to be in the 70 to 80 range in offense, and then you got to have a top 25 defense to make the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be a wild card pick, I think, for me, Sean. And it's really going to come down to if those transfers can score.
Yeah, they got Creighton at home and Baylor. No, Creighton's their only power conference opponent in the non-conference. So if you get that at home and you beat all these other teams that are in the 200s and 300s, and you go undefeated into Big 12 play, there's a chance to make the tournament. So
Yeah.
the next team we got here is the TCU Horned Frogs. They were 22-13 and 9-9 last year. Jamie Dixon is back for year 8 in Fort Worth. They do lose 2 of their best players from last year's team. Mike Miles and Damian Baugh, Eddie Lampkin, and Shahada Wells are also gone. Jameer Nelson Jr., the transfer from Delaware, is coming in. Avery Anderson III from Oklahoma State is coming in. Isam Mustafa from Coastal. Trevion Tennyson from Texas A&M and Corpus Christi. Ernest Uday from Kansas are all coming in too. So O'Bannon is back. Emmanuel Miller is back, whom we might talk about later. But this TCU team has a lot of talent, and they should be able to play a little more like basketball this year. They were pretty much just a track meet team
Yeah.
last year. They can
They were
defend,
they were
and they should be
scrappy.
able to score it.
They were a scrappy bunch last year, but the boys from Fort Worth, Sean, they won the transfer portal last year. Absolutely crushed it, adding some really, really, really good players. Mike Miles is going to be a huge loss for them. But with that being said, when you're adding Jameer Nelson Jr., who was killing it with Delaware last year, other guys, as you said, S.A. Mufasa and Trey Tennyson from Corpus Christi, but the big ones that I'm looking at are the Big 12 transfers. See, not a lot of Big 12 transfers. We talked about L.J. Cryer already, transferring from Baylor to Houston, but 2 guys here, Avery Anderson, transferring from Oklahoma State, and Ernest Uday from Kansas, who's going to be a big man, hoping to step up and get some minutes. He only got a few minutes a game last year. But, they still have some of their scrappiness left. Chuck O'Bannon Jr. was perhaps the scrappiest of players for TCU last year. And with Emmanuel Miller, they're my dark horse to win the Big 12 this year. I think they've absolutely got the talent coming in. They're going to have to get a little bit used to the conference, but if there's a team that epitomizes the grit of the Big 12, it's TCU. And despite my hatred for Trash Can U, I think they're a dark horse to win this conference. I got them 5th. That 5th could easily be up at 2.
I've got them in the 6th spot. I'm a little disappointed with their non-conference schedule. They don't really have many tough teams. They have a couple teams that might be okay, but as of now, they are 3-17 in non-conference strength of schedule, and that is really killer. Their strength of schedule will be near the top because they got to play all the other Big 12 teams, but the committee has rewarded teams and punished other teams for poor non-conference strength of schedule numbers. They do have Georgetown on the road, Clemson on a neutral, Arizona State on a neutral, Old Dominion on a neutral. One of those might be an MTE.
Yeah.
But, there's a real chance that none of those teams are going to go to the tournament. And, the best case scenario for TCU is they win them all, and then 2 of them make the tournament, and then there goes your non-conference strength of schedule up. But, their first 7 opponents here, or 6, 344, 282, 302, 350, 289, and 354. I mean, none of those games should be in the 20s. Those are some of the worst teams in Division I. You should win those by 30. And you're going to have a lot of chances to figure out rotations and stuff, but you better win by a lot or the metrics will not be coming to you.
And it's interesting, Sean. TCU at this point with Jamie Dixon is known for not having a strong out of conference. We look at teams like Baylor, and I'm talking a lot about Baylor here, but very opposite. They've got Auburn, Duke, Michigan State, and they play in the NIT season tip-off with Oregon State, Florida, and Pitt. So very different approach here. This approach can backfire a lot more than the one where you load up your out-of-conference schedule. Because if you load up your out-of-conference schedule and lose to Duke by 20, you lose to Duke by 20 and then move on. You lose to Southeast Missouri State in the preseason, and that carries you forever. We saw that with Rutgers last year. Did not make the big dance because of a couple of awful losses in our first couple of games. So you're right. This could absolutely backfire for TCU. But I think they're a really good team, and I don't see them losing those games.
Yeah, they should be a better offense this year. Last year they were one of the worst teams in Division I at shooting threes, so that's why they played. They ran track meets. let's get layups in transition, and even if we give up a
Yeah.
couple, we're going to have to do that. But yeah, 24th in offense, 17th in defense. I think TCU will be in that high teens range to low 20s, and they'll, on their day will be as good as any of these teams in the Big 12. But you got to figure it out, and you've got no easier opponents here early on to figure
Yeah.
out your rotations. And I would not take your foot off the gas in these games because even an 11-point win to Mississippi Valley State is really bad for your numbers, and
Yeah.
that if we see TCU in the 5 to 6 seed range, it'll be because their numbers aren't as good as the other teams, even if they do have 20-22 wins or something like that. Next team, Mike, we're going to go down to Austin. The Texas Longhorns were 29-9 and 12-6 last year. They did make the Elite Eight. This is Rodney Terry's second season, first full season in charge of the Longhorns. He's got a very different roster from a year ago. Marcus Carr, Jabari Rice, Timmy Allen, and Christian Bishop have all left the program. Max Asmus, Caden Shedrick, Ithiel Horton, Chindal Weaver, Zarek Oyema are all transfers in, and then they get Chris Johnson, the freshman from Montverde. Texas is my pick to win the conference. They return Dylan Disu, Dylan Mitchell, Tyrese Hunter, and you get one of the best guards in the country in Max Asmus. This team should be one of the best in the country.
Yeah, I mean, Max Asmus was right up there with Hunter Dickinson as the top transfers coming in. And, of course, he's coming to their conference. Texas got him away from Baylor, who was down to those two. So I'm not bitter about that at all. But with that being said, the depth from Texas last year, albeit that they lost several players who graduated and left the program, you've got so many really good players that are remaining. We saw Dylan Disu take off last year in the postseason, play phenomenally through the Big 12 tournament, and then pretty much saved the day for Texas against Penn State. Had 27 points. I think went 9 for 9 or 10 for 10 from the field in that game. Played phenomenally, and I expect to see that this year on top of Dylan Mitchell and Tyrese Hunter coming back. This Longhorns team is loaded, Sean. You bring in one of the top players in this freshman class coming in. This is going to be a phenomenal team. And they cover all the bases. They've got some of the best guard play, but they've also got some really gritty front court players like Dylan Disu, who's going to match up well against guys like Hunter Dickinson. So I love Texas this year. I've got them number 2. I played around between them and Houston. It was that was kind of a debate for me, but I love Texas. Putting the Longhorns number 2. Really good team.
Yeah, it should be good pretty early on for Texas too. Rodney Terry's got the interim tag removed, so hopefully for him,
big year.
Big year. That decision can backfire pretty quickly, and they certainly took their time with it too. He was. It may have even been the entire season. If he was the interim for the entire season.
They waited until 2 days after they lost the Elite Eight game, or maybe the Sweet 16 game to Miami, until he got hired. So they let him hang on for the entire season before they committed to him. But it paid dividends because that guy is making a hefty sum of money as the head coach at the University of Texas.
Yeah, they've got Louisville in the Empire Classic, and the winner of that game will play the winner of UConn and Indiana. So there's a big chance for them to face another team that should be in the top 5 in UConn. And they've got Marquette on the road and LSU on a neutral. So they've got some opportunities to put themselves near the top of the country early on, and they don't have the toughest Big 12 schedule either. So that's what pushed me to put them first. I think Kansas will be a better team, but I could see Texas getting
tougher schedule.
That regular season conference schedule because, like some of the other conferences, it's no longer balanced. You don't get to see everybody twice.
Yeah.
So
it's gonna be a hell of a send off for Texas before they go to the SEC next year and probably dominate that conference. And we'll get to that conference preview later, Sean. But Texas, I think they got a good chance to win it all and a good send off.
Yeah, they've got them and Oklahoma will be going. So this is the only year that these 14 teams will be in the conference.
Yeah.
And then a couple more coming in.
4 more additions next year, though, Sean.
So the next team we'll go to, Mike, is a team with a new coach. Texas Tech Red Raiders 16-16 and 5-13 last year under
How
Mark
about this one?
Adams. They do lose Kevin O'Banner, Devion Harmon, and Fardaz Imac, but they do replace them with a lot of transfers. You've got 2 transfers from Arizona State. That's Warren Washington and Devin Cambridge, both really solid there. They've got Joe Toussaint, the point guard from West Virginia, Darian Williams from Nevada, Kerryon Lindsey from Georgia, and Chance McMillan from Grand Canyon. They do return Pop
Yeah.
Isaacs, Lamar Washington, a couple of these other players. McCaslin won the NIT with North Texas last year. He's, I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic for the Red Raiders this year.
Yeah. And let me start off with McCaslin being an outstanding hire for Texas Tech. This guy he wasn't just a one-year wonder with UNT. He has built a program at North Texas. Remember, they beat Purdue a couple years ago in the NCAA tournament. This is a really, really good team. And they were an at-large bid bubble team last year before they missed out on the NCAA tournament. But this is a fantastic hire, a former Scott Drew assistant, so he knows the Big 12. He also played the Big 12 as a Baylor alum. This is a fantastic hire. It's a guy that knows Texas basketball in and out, and he proved it with getting some big-time transfers. I'll start with saying Pop Isaacs is a huge return for them. Him not entering the portal and staying there is huge. He's going to be running the ball this year, controlling the point guard position for Texas Tech, and adding some experience to an otherwise unexperienced Big 12 team. They do get a big transfer from West Virginia with Joe Toussaint, and then Darian Williams from Nevada. Just completing this narrative in the Big 12 with so many transfers, Texas Tech is going to be loaded with them again. I think they might struggle with the physicality a little bit, but McCaslin is a perfect coach for them. He's a good fit in Lubbock. I have Texas Tech finishing 8th and getting back to the NCAA tournament this year, Sean.
Yep, I have them 8th also, Mike. Now, we can criticize non-conference schedules, but I think it's good for Texas Tech that they don't have some of the heavy hitters. They've got a Villanova team on a neutral, where if you listened yesterday, Chuck and I are extremely high on Villanova this year, and that will be tough. But you got Butler away, Vanderbilt at home, and a couple of teams in the low 100s. Now, the scores of those games might not be that different than some of these other bye games, but those teams have a chance to win their conference and make the NCAA tournament, and those affect your numbers so much better than playing a 350 ranked team. They only have one in the 300s, and they have Sam Houston State at 107 and a San Jose State at 104 and a Vanderbilt at 81. Like those help your non-conference strength of schedule a lot more than you might realize. So I like that they can get their feet wet and win some games against some teams that aren't terrible but also aren't top 25 teams, and then I like them to make the tournament too. The only thing is that they don't have a single player on their roster over 6'7", so we might see some interesting zones or presses or anything from McCaslin, but he could figure something out, I think.
Size matters, and that's going to be a big deal in the Big 12 conference this year. Hunter Dickinson is going to be tough for them to defend against, and a couple of other really big centers here. So sorry, I got some peanut gallery in here now. But with that being said, I still think Texas Tech is a really, really fantastic team, and I think they'll make the tournament.
Yeah, Texas Tech, now they're doing this again. They had a new coach just 2 years ago. So hopefully this one goes a little better than Mark Adams. The next team, Mike, will be the last new team in the conference. That'll be the Central Florida Knights. Johnny Dawkins is in his 8th season in charge in Orlando. The Knights were 19-15 and 8-10, 7th in the American last year, but they were pretty solid over the last 4 or 5 years. They had a couple of at-large bids in the NCAA tournament, including a near tip-in to go to the Sweet 16 against Zion Williamson, Cam Reddish, and R.J. Barrett and Duke. And it's an interesting. It is nowhere close to any of the other Big 12 teams in Florida, but they bring in some transfers. DeMar Langford from Boston College, Ibrahima Diallo from San Jose State, Jalen Sellers from Ball State. They do lose a number of their players off their team last year. But this was the reason why they're in the Big 12 is because of football, and their basketball team has had some success, but they don't usually sell out. Any what can we expect from UCF this year?
Hey, they got Demore Langford, which is a big transfer from a pretty terrible team in Boston College. But with that being said, I really do not have very many high hopes for Central Florida this year. It's pretty bummer. It's a bummer that we're bringing up the worst two stories in the Big 12 as the last two teams that we're talking about. But Central Florida, this is a team that lost 6 players last year to the transfer portal, and their top player, who is Taylor Hendricks, lottery pick, he's gone. And this is a team that was 8-10 in the American Conference last year. So they were incredibly unimpressive in a mediocre conference, and they lost pretty much all their top players. So, maybe Dawkins got something drawn up that we don't see. I have Central Florida in the cellar of the Big 12 this year. I'm in 14th, and I don't think they win more than like 2 games in conference, if I'm being honest. They might steal a couple at home, but I think this is going to be a really rough year for UCF.
Yeah, I have them in 12th, but that's because I just don't like the 13th and 14th teams either. UCF could come in last and probably won't do better than 12th. They have a lot of players who've been okay on okay teams, and usually that doesn't work out, but sometimes it does. And they've got Miami on the road and Mississippi as their only real tests in the non-conference, and then it becomes real tough for them in the Big 12. But they're projected to be 13-16 and 5-13. I think that's probably about right. 5 wins will be a successful season for them, I think, in the Big 12.
Yeah.
So the last team we're going to get to here, Mike, is the West Virginia Mountaineers, 19-15 and 7-11 last year. They lost to Maryland in the round of 64. It's Josh Eilert's first season in charge. Bob Huggins was fired over the summer. They do lose a number of contributors from last year. Eric Stevenson, Kadrion Johnson, Trey Mitchell, Emmett Matthews, all double-digit scorers. But they do bring in a lot of transfers. They got Jesse Edwards from Syracuse, the 7'3" big man. Kerr Kriisa from Arizona. Raekwon Battle from Montana State. Quinn Slazinski from Iona. A Cook from Georgetown. Noah Farrakhan from Eastern Michigan. Where do you put the expectations for the Mountaineers this year?
This is wild, Sean. This Big 12 story of the offseason was Bob Huggins getting fired for a myriad of issues off the court. Josh Eilert's in as the interim coach, and I think he did a really good job of keeping some of these transfers from leaving. Immediately after Bob Huggins was fired, Kerr Kriisa was the guy that entered the transfer portal again with hopes of getting out of West Virginia. And Eilert convinced Kriisa to stay, and that was incredible for them. Jesse Edwards is going to be a big transfer in there. And then the big question that we're still not sure about is if Raekwon Battle will play. Yesterday, the NCAA made a ruling that he will not be eligible because he will be playing for his 3rd team. He got his transfer waiver earlier, a couple of years ago, 2 months. The governor from West Virginia is on his side. He's calling the president of the NCAA, Mark Emmert, to try to get Raekwon Battle out there to play for the Mountaineers. But that's going to be a big if, and I don't think he's going to get to play this year. If he doesn't, that's going to be a big hurt for West Virginia. But that being said, they're losing 5 starters from last year. Everybody's out. They graduated or transferred. Most of them entered the portal, and they're gone. They're out of West Virginia right now. So with that being said, guys like Kerr Kriisa, it's going to be – we'll see how good he is and how well he can perform in a different conference, completely different style of playing basketball than the Pac-12. A lot more aggressive on defense, where you don't see that in the Big Pac-12. You don't see defense, really. So with that being said, I have West Virginia at 10. I still think they'll have a chance to go to the the big dance. I think they're an NIT team. I think they're going to be one of those teams that get those automatic NIT bids with the new format we'll talk about in a little bit. But I mean, I just it's going to be a tough transition year for them.
Yeah, I've got them 13th. I just think that they're not. Nothing is ideal about this situation for them, and I think they're going to struggle kind of a lot, and it really stinks for them because he Huggins did do a pretty good job of compiling a pretty competent roster here, but outside of Creasa and Edwards, you have a lot of question marks, and you don't really have any. You do have a St. John's team and a Pittsburgh in the non-conference, and the way that I do think St. John's will probably win that game because of the amount of talent that they have, but I I don't know if I could see them making the tournament. I think they could have a chance to make the tournament late, but then end up coming up a little short. But yeah, I think 13th for the Mountaineers. So that is our 14-team Big 12 preview. We're gonna do, so the preseason for the Big 12, they did a 5-man first team and then 12 or so honorable mentions. Mike, we've got L.J. Cryer, Hunter Dickinson, DeJuan Harris, Emmanuel Miller, and Max Asmus making the Big 12 first team all-conference. If you had to pick a player of the year, it has to come from one of those 5 names, right?
Yeah, I think preseason player of the year has got to be Hunter Dickinson. Just super talented player, played for Michigan last year, and I think he's going to continue his domination this year. I think he's going to be a finalist for the Wooden Player of the Year. I think there's going to be a couple of guys that are going to break out that we didn't say in the preseason Big 12 top 5, and I think 2 of those guys are Dylan Dessou from Texas. I talked about him earlier, but a guy I didn't talk about, a Baylor Bear, Jalen Bridges. Jalen Bridges had a big time turnaround for Baylor last year. He started out, he really struggled, but coming to the postseason, that guy was automatic from 3, and he was playing fantastic basketball on defense as well. So that's a guy that I would say he's in my preseason all Big 12, and he's a guy that could make a run at Hunter Dickinson.
Yeah, I don't see the National Player of the Year coming from this conference. It will be Zach Edey again, barring disaster. But there's a couple people that could get their names at least up there. Hunter on a Kansas team that makes the Final Four or is in the top 5. Hunter will be up there, and you've got 13 names that could end up on this first team. So, Mike, who's your pick for Big 12 Coach of the Year?
Tough one, Sean. But I'm going to go with the plain vanilla answer. I picked Kansas to win it all for the Big 12 Conference. I'm going to pick Bill Self to be Coach of the Year. I think Rodney Terry will make a great choice. And I think if Houston succeeds in the Big 12, Kelvin Sampson will absolutely be up there because of his lack of experience in the Big 12. The thing that, and I didn't say this earlier, the thing that I think will hurt Houston the most is that transition to the Big 12 Conference. They are an elite team, don't get me wrong. They're not used to playing in the physicality and the speed of the Big 12 night in and night out, where last year the only signature team that they had to play in the American Conference was Memphis. Memphis wasn't, they weren't a Kansas. They're not a Baylor. They're none of those teams. So I'll be curious to see but if Kelvin Sampson can put his team in the top 3, he's also a great pick for Coach of the Year.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. We did this in the Big East yesterday, and we both had the same pick, and it's going to be a lot of people's picks. But, I don't think it's as simple as whoever wins the conference because all of those teams are supposed to be elite. In terms of the only coach that I think can get it that's not going to be near the top is probably Grant McCasland. If he makes the tournament and he's really solid, they get a 6 or 7 seed, I could see him getting it. But I'm going to go with Terry, first full year in charge. I picked them to win. If Texas wins and Texas Tech isn't really good, then he'll get it. But it really could be, 8 or 9 of these coaches probably have a real shot at this. And that's not something that can be said
Yeah,
really in any of the conferences. But
absolutely.
last thing, Mike, how many coaches? Well, I guess won't be here next year because some of these teams won't be here next year. But any coaching, you see any coaching changes being made based off performance in this conference after this year?
I'm going to say from the staple Big 12 teams, the only guy that could be on the hot seat is Porter. Well, Porter Moser is going to leave the conference with Oklahoma. It might be Johnny Dawkins with UCF. They really stalled the last couple of years, and ever since their run in 2019, he might be the guy that's on the hot seat the most. A lot of the new coaches, McCaslin, he's going to have a little bit of a leash, a longer leash. Um, West Virginia, they've got an interim coach right now. Their guy, he's probably not going to make it through this year, if I'm being honest. But I don't know if he's going to fit that narrative. I think as full-time hires, it's got to be coming from UCF and Coach Dawkins.
Yeah, I don't think Mark Pope will be let go from BYU. They really like him, and he's done it enough times to have
Boying the same in Oklahoma
Yeah.
State. He's loved so much in Stillwater, and he's got a great relationship with the boosters. So even if they have a bad season, I don't think he's going anywhere.
Yeah, and usually these coaches get more than one, bad year, and West Virginia will probably have a new coach next year, and that might be it.
Yeah.
So I don't think there'll be any changes in the Big East either, other than maybe Tony Stubblefield. So I feel like you can always say that at the beginning of the year, but here we are. So before we wrap it up, Mike, we're gonna go over a piece of news that came out like a half an hour before we started, and
Crazy.
it does go it does have some meaning on the Big 12 because a couple more teams are going to be playing postseason basketball than probably should. So for this upcoming year, the 2024 NIT, the conference regular season champions that do not win their conference tournament will not be given an automatic bid to the NIT. Instead, the NIT will guarantee two teams based on the net rankings from each of the Power 6 conferences: ACC, Big East, Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12, and SEC. The top two teams in the net rankings not otherwise qualifying for the NCAA men's basketball tournament, regardless of win-loss record, will be selected. Additionally, the 12 teams automatically selected will be guaranteed the opportunity to host a first-round game. Once the 12 automatic qualifying schools have been selected, the NIT committee will complete the field with the 20 best available teams to complete the 32-team field. Based on the committee's evaluation, the best 4 teams of the 20 at-large teams selected will complete the 16 first-round hosts, with the deference given to the first 4 teams out selected by the NCAA Men's Basketball Championship NCAA Tournament Selection Committee. Additional teams from the 6 conferences are eligible to be selected as the at-large teams and can also be selected as hosts. So that's a huge piece of information there, and we don't have to talk about it a ton because we'll have a lot of time to, but disappointing, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, huge, big disappointment for me. And it's almost like the NIT's tired of 8 seeds beating 1 seeds because it's happened. It's been fairly common in the last 5 years, where eight seeds that are hungry are beating unmotivated 1 seeds, and it's like they're trying to make, I guess higher motivation maybe for higher market teams that are going to bring more people to watch in the semifinals and finals. But I think the NIT has made a couple of drastic mistakes. This one being the biggest one, but the other one moving away from New York and Madison Square Garden. The NIT, Sean, it's just not what it used to be, I think. And it's really disappointing. Team like Utah Valley. Utah Valley went to the championship game last year. With this format, Utah Valley would not even sniff the NIT. They might not even sniff the CBI. And on top of that, Sean, you talk about so many good players that played for mid-major conference teams inside the NIT that are not, they would not be given the same opportunity to shine and get in the transfer portal and go to these other teams. But when you talk about a tournament like the NIT, there's not a better way for small market players other than the big dance, which is huge, to showcase their talents and get into the transfer portal. I guarantee you that these Utah Valley players, if they didn't make their run through the NIT, they're not getting looks to go to other places, and that's really disappointing for those players and for those communities. So I think this is an incredible loss, Sean. And looking at this is just last year, Sean. 3 8 seeds beat number 1 seeds in the first round of the tournament. It's not because these teams are not performing well. It's because the NIT is tired of seeing small market teams run the table, and they lose out on a smaller attendance at the Final Four. But your number 1 seeds aren't winning. Like, sorry.
Yeah, those teams that just miss out on the tournament, which are the 1 seeds in the NIT, they don't want to be in the NIT. And they were looking at the tournament for probably most of the year. And, you got a Hofstra who beat Rutgers, and you get a
Morehead State beat Clemson, Utah Valley, they won. They got all the way to the finals.
It does mean a lot to win your regular season as a mid-major team. And usually you get rewarded by being able to play against a power conference opponent at their arena on ESPN. Do we really need to see a 15-15 Vanderbilt play a 14-16 West Virginia? Like, that doesn't do anything. Yeah. Nobody wants to play it. The fans will, I guess you want to win it, but the college basketball season is long enough. And Wisconsin was the only team off the top of my head that was from a power conference that did go a couple rounds into the NIT. Yeah. But Michigan lost early, Rutgers lost early, Clemson lost in the first round, as you said. So
Oklahoma State got to the quarters, and that was it for them. Oregon made it to the quarters as well. They lost to Wisconsin. Other than that, the semifinals, I think, were Utah Valley, UAB, North Texas, and Wisconsin. But that's exciting.
Yeah.
When else are you watching North Texas, UAB, and Utah Valley squaring off against each other, and it means something?
And they all were.
Doesn't happen.
At least North Texas was top 50 in KenPom for most of the season, and those are good teams. And it's a conversation for another time. But when NCAA tournament expansion comes, if it looks anything like this, that will not be good for the game.
Yeah, I'm sad.
But we'll end it off with that. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. We've got 3 more major conferences to preview before the ball tips on November 7th. We'll keep you updated on when those are going to be, whether it's Mike, Chuck, or Joe. One of them will be on with me to discuss it. So thank you for tuning in, and be sure to check out all the Instagram posts, and we'll see you next time.